What's up, guys? So today's video is a bad film review, and I am currently in the works of writing up my Comic-Con videos. I don't know if it's going to be one or two, but today's bad film review is in relation to the Marvel ranking that I did a couple of days ago. And so today I'm actually reviewing not just the Marvel film that I like the least, but the film in general that I like the least, nay, hate the most. I absolutely despise this movie for a number of reasons, and I'll get into all of those at the end. But yeah, here's my bad film review for Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance. Now, for this video, I have been as fair to this film as I have to others, like, I think I did an Assassin's Creed one, I've done Green Lantern, I am in the process of making playlists for all of these, so there will eventually be playlists for all of these series that I'm making at the moment. But I was just as fair to this film, despite the fact that I hate it the most of any film. And I mean, it did okay. Certainly not as high as the Metacritic user score, but it did alright. So speaking of scores, I'm going to quickly run you guys through the scores that went into this. So from Rotten Tomatoes, the critic score was 26%, which, from a personal thing, is probably around about where I place this. If you watched the ranking video, you'll know that this has an average score of like low 30s. I think it's like 31 or 32%. Yeah, that's kind of where I would have thought that I would end up putting this. I didn't. The audience score from Rotten Tomatoes was 45%, so a little bit higher there. The Metacritic score for this film was 39%, so higher than the Rotten Tomatoes score. Rotten Tomatoes score is actually the lowest of all the scores here. And the Metacritic user score was 58%, which is the highest of all of them. And I would not go as far as to say that it is worthy of being nearly a 60% film, considering that sort of bad films, according to my app, is like the bottom 40%. You've got most films fitting in the middle 20%, between 40 and 60, and then good films going from 60% and upwards, which means that all of the MCU is in that top good films range. And then obviously people that want to watch really good films are watching from like the top 10%. So yeah, I wouldn't put it as high as a 58%, but that's what the users on Metacritic gave it, which leaves us only with the IMDb score of 55%, which when you average those out is 45%. I believe my maths has been done correctly there. I did calculate that quite a while ago. I've been in prep for this video for some time, and the only thing that was taking me so long making it was actually having to watch the film, because that's the part that I didn't want to do. So if you haven't seen one of these videos before, I take a film that has a bad critical score, sort of overall, and as I've just explained, that's anywhere below 40%, and then if you went and watched the ranking video, you'll know that this was in the low 30s, so it qualifies. I then break it down into 10 different sections, give each of those sections a score out of 10, add them all up for a total out of 100, giving me a percentage. So those 10 criteria are script, casting, acting, directing, cinematography, editing, soundtrack, its special and visual effects, whether those are practical or computer animated or what, location or set design, so the actual where the action is taking place, because that's either been built by a set designer or scouted by a location scout, and then its accuracy as an adaptation or derived from a pre-existing entity, whether that's a video game, a book, an anime, what have you, or its originality as a purely original piece, which gives us our 10 scores. So I'm going to get straight in and get through these scores as quickly as possible so I can get to why I think that I actually was really generous with scores here. So the script gets a 4 purely because of the fact that, and granted, I haven't read many Ghost Rider comics. He is one of my favorite characters. I just haven't actually sat down and read any of his like big sort of story arcs, because as far as Marvel's concerned, he's one of the lesser characters. But the script gets a 4 purely because the idea of the devil being able to exist on Earth but needing to have a child that he can sort of possess so that he can live with full power on Earth makes no sense. There's literally a scene in this film where the devil is trying to summon the devil into this kid's body, and I don't know how you do that. How do you summon yourself into something else? That's just possession. Just possess him. You don't need this whole... Anyway, aside from that, there's this whole sort of sideline story with these like drug dealers and gun runners and stuff. One of them ends up becoming the sort of semi-demon Blackout, but he also has rot powers. Like he can cause things to decay at an accelerated rate, which is not one of Blackout's powers, which means it was purely put in there simply to make him more of a threat in the movie, and give him sort of like an offensive ability rather than just being able to turn out lights, as the name Blackout implies. And then there's another sort of side story with this sort of French priest guy who is trying to keep everyone safe in this, like, I'd like to say it's like a monastery or something, because there's all these monks running around, but it's literally in a cave, and it just makes no sense. And despite the fact that he's a priest, he's actually quite the alcoholic, because there's actually a point there where he tells Johnny Blaze that he's had his eye on this 200-year-old bottle of wine for ages. It's like, okay, cool. So it's just really weird. It doesn't make a whole heap of sense. The idea of Ghost Rider trying to keep the character that would end up being his successor as the Ghost Rider in the comics, Danny Ketch, safe from the devil so that he doesn't become the Ghost Rider, does make sense considering the previous film had him just trying to, get rid of the curse until he decided to keep the curse. But then at the beginning of this movie, all of a sudden he's trying to get rid of it again, and it's no longer his curse that he wants to have. And it just... Despite the fact that they're both Nick Cage Ghost Rider films, there seems to be no... Like, they've just completely disregarded the first one, remade it, and it just makes no sense. Like they even sort of had an opening sequence where they just rehashed how he got the powers, rather than just being like, you've seen the first one, here's the second one, he already has his powers, you know what to expect now. They literally did a remake with the same actor playing the same character, and I mean, when it's a lead and not something like J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson in Far From Home, it's off-putting. And then when you consider that this film came out the same year as other Marvel films like Winter Soldier, which is generally agreed to be one of the better MCU movies, this makes it even more disappointing. I digress. Casting gets a 6. In the cast, there is Nicolas Cage. This is probably going to tell you what kinds of films I like, but I'm actually kind of a Nick Cage fan. I think he's a great actor. He does crazy really well, I'll grant that, but he also has done other things, like most recently he was Spider-Man Noir in Into the Spider-Verse. He's also played Superman in Teen Titans Go to the Movies, which I think is hilarious, considering that in the 90s there was actually a plan to make a Superman film with Nicolas Cage as Superman, and he had like this great dirty mullet or something. I will try to find a picture and leave it at the end of this video for you. It is possibly one of the more hilarious things I've ever seen in my life, and I just kind of wish that film had gone ahead. I don't care if it literally got 10% on all the critical, like every critic just gave it a 10%. I wouldn't have cared. That would be my favourite film. He's also played as more kid-friendly characters. He's played Grug, which is the father character in The Croods. He's played Balthazar Blake in The Sorcerer's Apprentice. And then for more adults, he's played Big Daddy in Kick-Ass as well. So he's kind of been stumbling his way around doing some pretty big stuff in the last sort of 10-15 years, and it's upsetting that this was one of them, because this film is horrible. The other two sort of big names for this film were Idris Elba, who most notably, as far as Marvel is concerned, played Heimdall in the Thor movies. He was also Roland in The Dark Tower recently, Krull in Star Trek, Fluke. He was the voice of Fluke in Finding Dory, as Shere Khan in the live-action Jungle Book remake. He voiced Chief Bogo in Zootopia. He was Stacker Pentecost in Pacific Rim, the guy that's in charge of the Jaegers. And he was also Roke in The Losers, where he worked with Chris Evans as well. So Idris Elba is phenomenal. He's also, the lead actor in the TV show Luther as well. So Idris Elba's got pretty good history behind him as well. And then the other one is, and I sincerely hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but it's Kieran Hines. He was the voice of Steppenwolf in Justice League. So between that and this, it doesn't seem like he's that great. But he was also Mance Rayder in Game of Thrones. And he also played Aberforth Dumbledore in the Deathly Hallows movies of the Harry Potter series. So he's sort of got some good ones and some bad ones, like just about every actor. But yeah, so when you consider that you've got that kind of talent in this film, it's actually kind of surprising that this film didn't do better than it did. The acting is a 4. As I said before, Nick Fury, got Marvel on the fucking brain. Nick Cage does crazy really well, and he just decided to turn that dial up to 11 in about 12 different scenes here. We all know that really iconic Nick Cage crazy face. He pulls that for like a solid 12 15% of this film is just close-ups of him doing the crazy face, and it's, I mean, it fills it out while he's like transforming into Ghost Rider or trying to hold Ghost Rider back, and so it kind of brings that part of the character across really well. But at the same time, the way they had edited it, and I will get into that in a second, just makes it jarring, and it makes it sort of off-putting to watching the rest of the film. I will say that I did enjoy some parts of it, parts where he's, you know, either completely sane Johnny Blaze or completely sane Ghost Rider, because Ghost Rider, simply because of the fact that it's literally a like a divine spirit possessing his body that gives him the powers of the Ghost Rider, it's just automatically crazy. Yeah, so it does do that really well, but other than that, it's just sort of, yeah, it's below average. I gave it a 4 because everyone else sort of does an average job. Like, you know that these actors could do better and could present these better. I mean, that acting score could have been a 5 because of how convincing Idris Elba's French accent is. But at the same time, yeah, it's just sort of brought back down when most of the film is this really jarring, sort of off-putting performance by Nick Cage, which is a little upsetting as a fan of his. The directing sort of goes hand in hand with that. Like, I'm not going to entirely blame the actors. Like, Nick Cage had played this character before. That film scored better than this one. Okay, so like the sequel is always worse theory sort of applies here. But the fact that he was able to play that character so well in the first one, and I believe there were different directors between those two films, means that directing is kind of also partly to blame here, and the choices that the directors made on how characters should come across and how they should interact with each other, and sort of the emotions behind the performances and stuff. Yeah, it just sort of all sort of culminates together. There's the acting, the directing, the editing sort of all fit together under this same sort of weird sort of, yeah, they just sort of intermingle a little too much, and it's hard to tell if the acting's poor or the directing's poor or the editing's poor in some parts. Cinematography got a 5, and the reason it gets a point more than the other 3 in this sort of midsection here, is because there are some actually genuinely good camera angles and transitions and stuff, and you can tell that the cinematographers were trying to, as much as they could, make this a visual spectacle, and it was just sort of let down by all these other things, like the editing, and therefore the pacing of the film, as far as how quickly things are cut together and whatnot, and not so much story-wise, but also because they had to sort of work within the confines of this frustratingly awful script. The directing and the acting and how the characters moved and stuff, you know, that extra point is just sort of like you did well with what you had, but what you had was shit. So cinematography gets a 5. Editing, like I said before, got a 4 as well. Yeah, as I said before, the cutting and sort of placing of shots and stuff, sometimes there'll be shots and you're like, okay, why would you put that in at all? You know, like sort of like a cutaway sort of thing to try and make you feel like you're in the scene itself. Just, yeah, was weird. The soundtrack gets a 5. I mean, if you think in your head, what does a superhero slash action film soundtrack sound like when the main character is sort of a more supernaturally based character with like demonic villains, and then you've got you sort of heavy metal punk like 90s vibe with the costume and the sort of skull and fire and stuff. What does that sound like? You just thought of the soundtrack for this film. It's literally what you would expect. Nothing groundbreaking. There's no like super memorable pieces of music in this. It's just all sort of background noise to fill out the parts that don't have dialogue, basically. And it's basic, so it gets a 5. It's not horrible. Like you don't remember this music because it's that bad, but you also don't remember the music because it's that good. And so soundtrack gets a 5. Visual and special effects gets a 6. There is a part there where the Ghost Rider gets into this giant like mining excavator thing, and it just causes all sorts of wanton destruction in this location that they're in. I don't even know what to call it. I think it's supposed to be like some sort of construction site or something, but it's like at night, so you can literally only see this massive thing as the backdrop, and then like where the action's taking place in the bottom of this like ditch. So like I said, but the practical effects of all the explosions and stuff, and the fact that this film would have required a lot of use of like pyrotechnics, and fire and stuff. Like they would have had to have a whole heap of little oil trails and stuff lit on fire and stuff. So having to actually work with fire, because whenever you see fire in a film, 9 times out of 10, that's real fire, and they have to be very careful about where they step, where they move, and like that's actual fire. Like if you've ever seen those parts where you've got like the men that are all on fire running out of a building, whatever, he's actually on fire. That's a stuntman, and he's actually on fire. So the fact that this film kind of relied heavily on that, because that's Ghost Rider's powers, helps give this a little bit more sort of substance. I only gave it a 6 because while it is good, the overuse of how many times Ghost Rider's fire starts to go out because of one reason or another, and their then reliance on him having smoke coming off his skull instead, doesn't sit well with me. Ghost Rider is a burning skeleton. His skull is on fire. You take the fire away, there is no smoke. He's not spewing, sulfurous gas into the atmosphere. His head's on fire, and that's it. There's no smoke. So once you start bringing smoke into this, I'm at the end of my, suspension of disbelief sort of thing. Like, no, that's not how this would work. There was something else, I can't think of it now. Anyway, I'll continue on. Location and set design, again, is sort of average. Like, they talk about this, like, remote monastery, and then you arrive into a monastery that literally looks like it's been carved out of the mountain. And not like, like you imagine a mountain temple carved into the mountain, and it's like elaborate and ornate doorways and stuff, with really small chisels and stuff, and they've like carved intricate details. No, they've literally just carved a chunk out of the rock, and there's a doorway, and then you're in the next room. I think they tried to make it look like it was still sort of being like made while these people lived here, but it just looked half-assed. The location for the weird scene where the devil summons the devil is, so if you imagine any scene that has any sort of like satanic ritual where you've got this like horde of followers in sort of a circle around where the ritual's taking place, and they're all chanting and wearing black robes and stuff. If you imagine that, it's usually deep underground, right? This scene has it above ground. They're literally in an open amphitheater where instead of having people sitting in the circular seating area, they're all standing up, and then the devil and this kid are kneeling down and sort of swaying around, literally on the stage that would be used for putting on performances. And it's like the most ridiculous thing. So yeah. Then we get down to our last one, which is accuracy and originality, which I gave a 6 to. That was lower, and then I thought of a couple of things that I was actually, well, actually, they sort of stuck to that pretty well. So, in the comics, the Spirit of Vengeance is an angel named Zarathos, who was originally the Spirit of Justice. He was then, and so like he would protect the innocent. That was his job: protect the innocent, make sure that justice is upheld and protect the innocent. He was then captured by a demonic horde, tortured until he went insane. It gives an excuse for Nick Cage using his crazy face, because the spirit that possesses him is actually insane, and his focus was corrupted, so he was no longer protecting the innocent, but punishing the guilty. Still technically the same thing, but he's now actively going after bad guys, rather than just like trying to keep them away from the good guys. And that actually happens in the comics, that actually happens here, and actually at the end of this film, Nicolas Cage is actually able to, like Johnny Blaze is actually able to feel the angelic side inside of him, and he's able to sort of summon the spirit of justice, which gives him blue flames instead of like orange ones towards the end. So he does sort of start making that progress back towards being a spirit of justice, and therefore more of an actual hero character rather than an anti-hero. So yeah, that got a 6, mainly for that one point that they got right, and the fact that they actually used another secondary villain that was actually still a Ghost Rider villain, that being Blackout. So I'll let the decay powers pass here, because they did actually use Blackout. The first film had Blackheart and Mephistopheles. This one had Mephistopheles and Blackout, so I'll let it pass. Which gives us a total score of 49%, which, if you remember from the beginning of this video, I would have thought going into this, and I did actually think going into this, that I was going to have a score that pretty much equaled what it got in the ranking video, somewhere in the low 30s, and it ends up being nearly 50%, which means that from a critical point of view, apparently I hate this film less than I thought, which, yeah, you can only hope that means that future Ghost Rider representations and I'm trying to think of a word. I know it starts with the letter P. Portrayals. Future Ghost Rider portrayals are better than this one. Now, the other reasons why I hate this film, which are not involved in this film being this film as much as things that happened after this film came out. So back in sort of 2008, when they brought up Iron Man and Incredible Hulk and started building the MCU, they also had this idea of making a sort of separate shared universe for their more adult-oriented characters and their more darker characters. They had actually remade a Punisher film. They went with the Warzone storyline, which is actually a big Punisher story arc in the comics. It didn't do as well. I believe it's one of the lower ones as well on the ranking list. But then this was the second one in that series, and then we're going to be calling this the Marvel Knights. So you're going to have your Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is going to have what the Marvel Cinematic Universe is, and then this was going to have sort of Punisher, Ghost Rider. I'm assuming had it continued on, it would have ended up including characters like Blade, potentially the Daredevil would have come into it. Characters like Moon Knight might have gotten films. There is actually a character called Werewolf at Night or something like that. He might have made an appearance, and it would have been sort of this darker, more sort of supernatural, like Man-Thing might have come into it. Some of these characters have either been referenced or highly anticipated by fans of the MCU as appearing in the MCU, and potentially this is where they were going to actually appear in the Marvel Knights continuity. But this film, Spirit of Vengeance, did so badly that it ended that franchise after only 2 films. So Warzone didn't do so well on its own. It's not like Warzone was a great film. Warzone suffered a lot. And then this film came out as sort of a remake / sequel to the original Ghost Rider, and then it did so badly that they just canned the entire continuity, left that on the back burner, and continued on making the MCU, which is why we ended up with Punisher in the Netflix shows and Ghost Rider on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. So they literally took those 2 characters, put them somewhere else in the MCU, so that we could forget that those 2 films ever actually happened. So that's one reason. Another reason is the directing duo that did this. So there were 2 directors, similar to how the Russo brothers worked together directing. But there were 2 directors on this film who had previously been going around as a directing duo, so the 2 of them working together as co-directors. And this film apparently did so, like such a bad experience for them that it actually made them decide to go their separate ways afterwards. So it literally broke up a directing duo that up until this point had been making really good films. I can't for the life of me think of any, and I'm gonna be completely honest, I didn't prepare any examples for you guys. I do apologize, but yeah, it broke up the directing duo of Neville Dean and Taylor, so that's another thing against it. And so then when you look at it like that, like, not only was its critic score down here on a bar that goes up to here sort of thing, but it ended an entire franchise that could have included a remake to everyone's favorite half vampire anti-hero, could have included one of the most anticipated characters for the MCU, and then could have done a remake for the 2005 Man-Thing film, which from memory is the 2nd worst Marvel film of all time. And as proof of that, I was only able to get halfway through it. and I believe for Electra, which is the worst one, oh no, Electra was the third worst one. I was able to get about halfway through Electra as well. And for Fantastic Four, which was the worst, only my love for that superhero team was able to get me through that film. So obviously similar situation to this. But yeah, so when you put sort of the critic score, the fact that it ended a franchise and broke up a directing duo, collectively, you can sort of see why I hate this film so goddamn much. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and the notification bell if you want to see more of these bad film reviews. Coming up on Wednesday, I've got my San Diego Comic-Con. I'm literally just unpacking the entire weekend. I'm going to be talking about all the things that I'm personally excited for, but again, from across the entire weekend. I've got song covers coming up. Let me just pull my calendar up. Literally got them all marked down. I got a song cover coming up on Friday, and every month I do a favorites video. I do a story time. I do part of my intro pack. I've got my resolution check coming up next Wednesday. There's a whole heap of stuff coming up, and this month sort of marks the end, sort of like the business end, as far as entertainment goes for me, because we've got August next month, which is not as busy, and then we've got September, which again isn't as busy, but then October's got my birthday, and like, I can literally probably name like 10 people I know that have birthdays in October, plus Halloween. November is sort of that sit-in month between October and November to sort of address everything that I didn't get to in October, and then December's got Christmas, which means Vlogmas. So make sure you hit that button if you want to see all the really cool stuff that I have coming up for the rest of the year. I'm literally probably going to be sitting down sometime this weekend coming and just like making all my like preparing all my videos and stuff. So yeah, you can check out my social medias in the links down below, and yeah, I think that's about it for this video. So until next time, guys, night to A2, and I'll check you all later.